Good day, everyone. I am Grace Villaraya, and today I'll be talking about phases. Our reference, English Syntax by Andrew Radford. Here's an overview for this chapter. We will look at recent work by Chomsky suggesting that syntactic structure is built up in phases, with phases including CP and transitive VP. At the end of each phase, part of the syntactic structure already formed undergoes transfer to the phonological and semantic components, with the result that the relevant part of the structure is inaccessible to further syntactic operations from that point on. In the previous chapter, we noted Chomsky's claim in recent work that all syntactic operations involve a relation between a probe P and a local goal G, which is sufficiently close to the probe, or in the case of multiple agreement, a relation between a probe and more than one local goal. We saw that Chomsky remarks that the P-G relation must be local in order to minimize search, because the language faculty can only hold a limited amount of structure in its active memory. Accordingly, syntactic structures are built up one phase at a time. Chomsky suggests that phases are propositional in nature and include CP and transitive VP, more specifically VP with an external argument which he denotes as V asterisk P. His rationale for taking CP and V asterisk P as phases is that CP represents a complete clausal complex, including a specification of voice, and V asterisk P represents a complete thematic argument structure complex, including an external argument. Once all the operations which apply within a given phase have been completed, the domain of the phase, for example, the complement of its head, becomes impenetrable to further syntactic operations. As we have already seen, Chomsky refers to this condition as the phase impenetrability condition, or PIC, and we can state it informally as follows. First, phase impenetrability condition, or PIC. The C command domain of a phase head is impenetrable to an external probe. For example, a goal which is C commanded by the head of a phase is impenetrable to any probe C commanding the phase. The reason why the domain of the phase head is impenetrable to an external probe, according to Chomsky 2001, is that once a complete phase has been formed, the domain of the phase undergoes a transfer operation by which the relevant domain structure is simultaneously sent to the phonological component to be assigned an appropriate phonetic representation, and to the semantic component to be assigned an appropriate semantic representation. And from that point on, the relevant domain is no longer accessible to the syntax. So, for example, once a complete CP phase has been formed, the TP, which is the domain, for example, a complement of the phase head C, will be sent to the phonological and semantic components for processing. As a result, TP is no longer visible in the syntax, and hence neither TP itself nor any constituent of TP can subsequently serve as a goal for a higher probe of any kind. For example, no probe C commanding CP can enter into a relation with CP for any constituent of CP. To have a clear concept of our discussion, let's consider the derivation of this sentence. Will Ruritania withdraw troops from Utopia? Given the light verb phrase, plus the verb phrase, analysis of verb phrases outlined in the previous chapter, will be derived as follows. The verb withdraw merges with its complement from utopia, with utopia being a DP headed by a null determiner, given the DP hypothesis, and its specifier troops, which is a QP headed by a null partitive quantifier. To form the VP, troops withdraw from utopia. This is then merged with a causative light verb whose external agent argument is Ruritania. Another DP headed by a null determiner, since the light verb is a fixal, it triggers movement of the verb withdraw from its original italicized position in verb to light verb. So we have here a derivation. The light verb will agree with and assign accusative case to the QP null troops, since a transitive light verb, for example, a light verb with an external argument is a face, and since the light verb phrase in the given tree diagram is transitive and has the external argument null Ruritania, the VP constituent, by virtue of being the domain or complement of the light verb, which is the head of this face, will undergo transfer to the phonological and semantic components at this point and thereafter cease to be accessible to further syntactic operations. Let's suppose that as part of the transfer operation, traces are marked as having a null spell out in the phonological component, this being indicated by strike through, and that uninterpretable features which have been deleted by operation of agreement are removed from the structure handed over to the semantic component, but not from the structure handed over to the phonological component. Consequently, the phonological component will not spell out the trace of the verb withdraw in V, and only the constituents null troops and from utopia will be given an overt phonetic spell out. Since C will has uninterpretable person or number features, it is an active proof which searches for a local goal to value and delete its unvalued features. Neither null troops nor null utopia are accessible to the probe will, since both are contained within a VP which has already been transferred to the phonological and semantic components. However, the DP null Ruritania is accessible to will and is syntactically active by virtue of its uninterpretable case feature. Hence, will agrees with and assigns nominative case to the DP null Ruritania. The auxiliary T will also has an EPP feature requiring movement of the closest matching goal to spec or specifier TP. Accordingly, the DP null Ruritania is moved from its original italicized position in specifier light verb phrase to become the specifier of will, so deriving the structure in diagram number 5. The resulting TP is merged with a null interrogative C. Let's suppose that yes/no questions contain a null yes/no question operator in specifier CP. For example, null counterpart of the adverb whether, and that C is strong affixal attracts will to move from its original italicized position in T to adjoin the null C, heading CP. At the end of the CP cycle, we will have the structure in tree diagrams number 6. Since CP is the face and the domain of the head of a face is spelled out at the end of a face, CP undergoes transfer to the phonological and semantic components at this point. The transfer operation results in the italicized traces of will and null Ruritania receiving a null spelled out in the phonological component. However, we are now left with something of a problem. We have come to the end of the derivation, but so far, neither C nor the null yes no question operator, which serves as its specifier, have been handed over to the phonological and semantic components for further processing. The following are the additional assumptions about transfer. Transfer, first, at the end of each phase, the domain undergoes transfer. Secondly, at the end of the overall derivation, all remaining constituents undergo transfer. In the case of number 6 tree diagram, the two remaining constituents which have not yet undergone transfer are those at the edge of CP, the edge of the projection comprising its head and any specifiers or adjuncts it has. Intransitive clauses, nor defective clauses or phases. Things work differently in such structures. When we say intransitive clauses, those containing a light verb with no external argument, while defective clauses are clauses which are TPs lacking a CP projection. So here is a derivation. There are thought by some to remain numerous problems in utopia. The unaccusative verb remain merges with its locative complement in null utopia. Utopia being a DP headed by a null determiner. To form the V bar remain in null utopia, and this V bar is in turn merged with its theme argument. The quantifier phrase numerous problems to form the VP numerous problems remain in null utopia. This VP in turn is merged with a null light verb which, being a fixal, triggers movement of the verb remain from its italicized position in V to adjoin to the light verb. So here is a derivation. A transitive light verb phrase is a phrase and requires its domain to be spelled out. The light verb phrase in here is intransitive because it has no external argument. For example, the light verb has no specifier. Hence, its verb phrase complement does not undergo transfer at this point, and the syntactic derivation proceeds by merging the resulting light verb phrase with infinitival to. Chomsky 2001 argues that infinitival to has an EPP feature and a present feature in defective clauses. It follows that to must project a specifier with person properties. So let's suppose this requirement is satisfied by merging expletive there in specifier TP. Here's a derivation. The TP in here is then merged as the complement of the passive participle thought, forming a V-bar constituent which is in turn merged with the agent by phrase by some to form a verb phrase. Given our assumption in the previous chapter that all verb phrases have a complex shell structure, the resulting VP will in turn be merged as the complement of a light verb, arguably one which is participial in nature, so accounting for why the verb is eventually spelled out on the passive participle form thought, and why Chomsky 1999 uses the label PRT to denote the relevant participial head. Since light verbs are affixal in nature, this means that the verb thought will raise to adjoin to the light verb. At this point, B is an active probe by virtue of its uninterpretable and unvalued F features, and so it searches for an active local goal to value its person or number features. There are two such goals within the structure in this derivation, namely the third person expletive pronoun there, active by virtue of its uninterpretable and unvalued case feature. Both there and numerous problems are accessible goals for B since neither is contained within a structure which has undergone transfer. According to Chomsky 2001, he suggests that a probe P locates every active matching goal G within its search space, within that part of the syntactic structure which is accessible to the probe by virtue of not yet having undergone transfer, and that where there is more than one such goal, the probe simultaneously agrees with all the relevant goals at the same time. According to Chomsky, P can find any matching goal in the face, pH that it had simultaneously deleting uninterpretable features. We can assume that the pronoun some is not active at this point because it falls within the domain of a closer probe by which we'll already have valued its case feature as accusative. What this means is that since B has uninterpretable person and number features, it will locate every active goal within its search space which has a person and or number feature. Since there has a third person feature which is uninterpretable, making it active, there is one such goal. Likewise, numerous problems is another active goal since it has third person and plural number features and is active by virtue of its uninterpretable case feature. Accordingly, B simultaneously agrees in person with there and numerous problems, and in number with numerous problems, so that B is assigned the values third person plural number. Since numerous problems is F complete, it can delete the uninterpretable person or number features of B. Conversely, B, by virtue of being finite, can value the unvalued case feature of numerous problems as nominative, and because B is also F complete, can delete the relevant case feature and also the person feature of there. The EPP feature of T is deleted by moving the closest active goal there from its original position as the specifier of 2 to become the specifier of B. Merging the resulting TP with a null declarative complementizer derives the CP structure shown in simplified form in the given derivation. Since CP is a face, the TP headed by TB, which constitutes its domain, will undergo transfer at this point, in accordance with the first assumption about transfer. It says that at the end of each phase, the domain complement of the face head undergoes transfer. The italicized traces of moved constituents will be given a null spell out, and the auxiliary B and T will be spelled out as R in the phonological component, since it has been valued as third person plural in the course of the derivation. The null C heading CP subsequently undergoes transfer by the second assumption. It says that at the end of the overall derivation, all remaining constituents undergo transfer and is assigned a null spell out in the phonological component and interpreted in the semantic component as marking the relevant sentence as declarative in force. In the context of our discussion about faces here, the key point which emerges is that neither an intransitive light verb phrase nor a defective TP clause constitutes a phase. For example, in this derivation, not the intransitive light verb phrase containing remain, or the light verb containing the passive particle thought, or the defective TP complement of thought. In consequence, the relevant light verb and TP constituents are still accessible in the syntax at the point where B is introduced into the derivation, so allowing B to agree with numerous problems. The derivation of the given sentence proceeds as follows. The unaccusative verb go is merged with its goal argument, the locative adverbial pronoun where, to form the V-bar go where, which in turn is merged with its theme argument he, to form the VP he go where. This in turn is merged with a null affixal light verb which triggers raising of the verb go to V from its original italicized position in V. So here's the derivation. Since VP or light verb is intransitive by virtue of the fact that the light verb has no external argument, light verb is not a phase and transfer cannot apply at this point. The syntactic computation therefore continues with C will, merging with the light verb in this derivation. Will agrees with and assigns nominative case to he, and the EPP feature of will triggers raising of he from its original position in specifier light verb to specifier TP. Merging the complementizer that with the resulting TP forms the CP shown in this derivation. Since CP is a phase, its domain, for example, its TP complement, will undergo transfer at this point. This means that neither TP nor any of the constituents of TP will subsequently be accessible to further syntactic operations. For example, in effect, TP and its constituents of TP are frozen in place once TP undergoes transfer. However, this causes an obvious problem since if all constituents of TP are frozen in place at this point, the WH word where will be unable to move from the sentence in final VP complement position it occupies in the given derivation or in the given sentence to the sentence initial main clause CP specifier position which it clearly needs to occupy in the sentence where is it thought that he will go. One way to overcome this problem is to assume that WH movement applies in a successive cyclic fashion and that the complementizer that in structures like in this sentence has an EPP feature and a WH feature which together trigger movement of the closest WH expression where to become the specifier of the complement clause CP headed by that before where subsequently moves on to become the specifier of the main clause C constituent containing the inverted auxiliary is. If this is so, at the stage of derivation represented in this sentence will move from the italicized position shown in another sentence to become the specifier of that. At the stage of derivation represented in this sentence where will move from the italicized position shown in this sentence to become the specifier of that. At this point, once all the operations which apply in the CP cycle have applied the domain of C, its TP complement will undergo transfer in accordance with the first assumption about transfer. Because CP is a phase, one consequence of this is that the italicized traces will be marked as receiving a null spelled out in the phonological component. After transfer of TP is completed, the syntactic compilation or computation continues. The CP in this sentence is merged as the complement of the verb think, and the resulting VP is in turn merged as the complement of a participial like verb, ensuring that think is eventually spelled out as the passive participle thought with the verb, the complement of TB, which has an EPP feature that is deleted by merger of expletive it in specifier TP. It affixal C will trigger raising of B from its original italicized position in C to C. Since C also has a WH attracting EPP feature, it will trigger movement of where from the italicized spec CP position in the complement cause into specifier CP position in the main clause, so deriving the CP shown in the following derivation or sentence, in the following sentence. Since CP is a face, its domain, the main clause TP will undergo transfer by the first assumption about transfer at this point, so that the italicized traces of is, thought, where will receive a null spelled out in the phonological component. Subsequently, the constituents where is plus null on the edge of the root CP undergo transfer by the second assumption about transfer. What our discussion here tells us that just as a movement applies in a successive cyclic fashion, each time moving the relevant nominal into the next highest spec TP position in the structure, so too within a phase-based theory of syntax, a bar movement operations like WH movement must apply in a successive cyclic fashion. This means that each time a new phase head is introduced into the structure, it will serve as a probe which attracts the closest with WH goal to move into its specifier position. The assumption that CPs are phases means that long-distance WH movement requires successive cyclic movement of a moved WH expression through intermediate specifier CP positions. However, since transitive light verbs are also phases, it follows that in structures containing one or more transitive light verbs, WH movement will have to pass through intermediate specifier light verb positions as well. Since transitive light verbs are phases, we can illustrate how this works in terms of the given sentence. What have they done? This sentence will be derived as follows. The verb do, shown here in its spelled out form done, merges with its thematic complement what to form the verb phrase done what. This is merged with a transitive light verb whose external argument is they and which, by virtue of being affixal, triggers raising of done from verb to light verb. The light verb, by virtue of being transitive, also values the case feature of what as accusative, and by virtue of being F complete, deletes it. Let's suppose that just as C can have an EPP feature attracting movement of a WH expression, so too a transitive light verb, perhaps by virtue of being a face head like C, can likewise have a WH attracting EPP feature. This because so what will be moved to become second specifier for light verb. So here's a structure. The notational convention assumed in this sentence is that first merge of a head with its complement forms an H bar or H projection. Second, merge of H with a specifier forms an H double bar H projection. Third, merge of H with another specifier forms an H treble bar or H projection, and so on. However, by tradition, the maximal projection of H is denoted as HP. Hence, the node labeled light verb in the given sentence is a V treble bar projection, but is labeled light verb because it is the maximal projection of the relevant light verb. The double specifier analysis in the given sentence is in accordance with Chomsky's 1998 assumption that a head can have multiple specifiers. In the case of the given sentence, an inner specifier they representing the external argument of the light verb, and an outer specifier which deletes the EPP feature of the light verb. In traces, in accordance with the first assumption about transfer, the verb phrase in this sentence will undergo transfer at the end of the light verb phase, and the two italicized traces will thereby be given a null spell out. Of course, what had not moved to specify your light verb at this point, it would have been spelled out in C2 and hence frozen in place and thereby wrongly be predicted to be unable to undergo double H movement. Since transitive verb phrase is a phase, the verb phrase domain done what in the given sentence will undergo transfer at the end of the light verb cycle. The trace copies of the moved constituents done and what will each receive a null spell out. The derivation when proceeds by merging T have with the VP in 19 forming the T bar in the given sentence or derivation. The probe have now searches for an appropriate goal. It needs to skip over what and instead identify they as the expression that it agrees with, assigns nominative case to, and attracts to move to specifier TP. Clearly, we cannot say that what is inactive as a goal since it needs to be an active goal in order to be able to undergo subsequent WH movement. However, it seems reasonable to suppose that what is active only for agreement with an A bar head, not for agreement with an A head. In the terminology of Ropert's 1994, a head like T which allows only an argument as its specifier is an A head, and a head like C which allows either an argument or an adjunct as its specifier is an A bar head. More specifically, we cannot suppose that a noun or pronoun expression which carries interpretable person or number or gender features is only active for agreement with an A head if it has an unvalued and undeleted case feature. This would mean that what is light verb at the earlier stage of derivation shown in the given sentence. By contrast, since they in the previous sentence is an unvalued case feature, it is active for A agreement and A movement but not for a bar movement. Accordingly, have progress, have agrees with its signs nominative case to and triggers movement to the subject they. So here is a derivation. Accordingly, have agrees with assigns nominative case to and triggers movement of the subject they. So here is the derivation. This TP is then merged with a null complementizer with a strong tense feature, triggering movement of have from to C, and an EPP feature which triggers movement of what to specifier CP. Here's the derivation. At the end of the CP phase, TP undergoes transfer in accordance with the first assumption about transfer. It says that at the end of each phase, the domain, for example, complement of the phase head, undergoes transfer. And the italicized traces are given a null spelled out in the phonological component. Subsequently, the constituents at the edge of CP, for example, its specifier, what, and its head, have, plus null, undergo transfer in accordance with the second assumption about transfer. It says, at the end of the overall derivation, all remaining constituents undergo transfer. Our discussion of the derivation of number 18, what have they done, shows us that in transitive clauses, a bar movement will involve movement through specifier light verb into specifier CP. An obvious implication of this is that WH sentences, like in the given sentences or sentence which contain two transitive clauses, what might she think that they will do? What might she think that they will do? Will correspondingly involve successive cyclic WH movement through two specifier light verb positions and likewise through the specifier CP positions. Our discussion of the derivation of number 18, what have they done, shows us that in transitive clauses, a bar movement will involve movement through specifier light verb into specifier CP. An obvious implication of this is that WH sentences, like in the given sentences or sentence which contain two transitive clauses, what might she think that they will do? What might she think that they will do? Will correspondingly involve successive cyclic WH movement through two specifier light verb positions and likewise through the specifier CP positions. An interesting question which arises is whether there is any empirical evidence in support of the successive cyclic analysis. As we shall see, there is, in fact, considerable evidence in support of such analysis. In this section, we look at evidence in support of the successive cyclic movement through specifier CP, and in the next section, we examine evidence of successive cyclic movement through specifier light verb. Let's begin with looking at evidence from English. Part of the evidence comes from the interpretation of reflexive anaphors like himself. As we saw in exercise 3.2, these are subject to principle A of binding theory, which requires an anaphor to be locally bound and hence to have an antecedent within the TP most immediately containing it. This requirement can be illustrated with a contrast in the given derivation. Jim was surprised that Peter wasn't sure that Mary liked this picture of himself best. And in letter B, Jim was surprised that Peter wasn't sure which picture of himself Mary liked best. In the first sentence, the TP most immediately containing the reflexive anaphor himself is the bold printed TP, whose subject is Mary. And since there is no suitable third-person masculine singular antecedent for himself within this TP, the resulting sentence violates binding principle A and so is ill-formed. However, in the second sentence, the WH phrase, which picture of himself, has been moved to the specifier position within the bracketed CP, and the TP most immediately containing the reflexive anaphor is the italicized TP, whose subject is Peter, since this italicized TP does indeed containing a C commanding antecedent for himself, namely its subject, Peter. There is no violation of principle A if himself is construed as bound by Peter through principle A, prevents Jim from being the antecedent of himself. In the light of this restriction, consider the following sentence. Which picture of himself wasn't he sure that Mary liked best? The antecedent of himself is he, and yet himself is clearly not C commanded by he.